Guys, this is Jerry Inspired. I have Professor Jason Dana, and he has been a very important part of my life because he got me into behavioral economics. He was my behavioral economics professor. And for my Hopkins and Georgetown and University of Maryland applications, he was one of the recommendations. So, man, I love Professor Jason Dana. I hope to present him to you guys. I hope you guys love him too. So, welcome, Professor Jason Dana.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jerry.
So I think we want to definitely talk about what you're interested in now, what you're working on now. But for people who are not familiar with you, let's do a little section on sort of your life journey, your academic journey. What did you think you'd be doing in college?
Yeah, nothing like this. I never really thought about it. Actually, I was not in like a top school or anything, not downing on where I did go. I went to like a satellite campus of Rutgers, like Camden. It was a largely commuter campus. I was interested in more like clinical psychology. So my undergrad degree was in psychology, but my focus and what I thought I'd be doing is something more like clinical.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you did your undergrad, and was this somewhere in grad school that you decided or became interested in behavioral economics?
Yeah, actually, for a time after undergrad, I worked in some psychiatric hospitals. I applied to and started attending a PsyD program, which is basically like a practice-based degree in doing clinical psychology, or you have practicum, you do therapy, you do assessments, all that sort of thing. Um, in my PsyD program, I read a paper by Robin Dawes, and I think it was called Representative Thinking and Clinical Judgment. But he was sort of taking all of these, behavioral economics, maybe not, I mean, more pointedly like judgment and decision making, and like really like human biases, and applying them to clinical work, like the stereotypes or what have you that clinicians might hold, the patterns they think they see. And I just thought it was brilliant. Like it really moved me. And I said, this is so right on every point. And I was equally like disappointed that most of my colleagues didn't seem to care about it. But that was sort of where my journey began, because I was just fascinated by that. And as I started reading more about that and looking into it more, I decided, no, that's where I want to be. That's what I wanted to be doing. So I applied to some grad programs, including Carnegie Mellon, where the late Robin Dawes was. And I actually got accepted there and got to work with Robin. He was my primary advisor. So that's sort of how I made the transition over. I really attribute most of it to Robin Dawes. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think what's very unique about your situation is you had a vast amount of experience in clinical psychology before you went into it. Like, I think a lot of behavioral economists, from my understanding, start out in economics and they sort of
Right.
apply the psychology. You had a deep sort of like immersion into psychology, and then you went and said, "Hey, let's get some economics, judgment, decision stuff in here."
Yeah, it was interesting going to Carnegie Mellon because they really had a focus on a broad education. They made me take micro at a grad program, and I was like out of my depth at first. It's like I don't know how to take a derivative. That was like undergrad. I don't, and but I got a good grounding in economics and other social sciences. I got to take a lot of really good classes with good people. And it changed my thinking a lot in ways I would have never anticipated even before I attended Carnegie Mellon. Like it really taught me to think like an economist, which I found very valuable and has like carried over into what I do now.
Hopkins right now is making me revamp, so to speak, my economic thinking. So I'm in a course where I'm taking micro and macro bunched up into a month and a half. And it's been a difficult course, but I've been realizing it's been shaping some of my understanding of potentially even some of the things I've been doing wrong in life. It's really cool. I'm like, wow, I really
Yeah.
appreciate this much more than in undergrad, because in undergrad, yes, you have certain responsibilities and stuff like that, but as a older adult, you can really apply even intro microeconomic thinking to a lot more. So I've been appreciating it so much more.
Yeah, I got a lot more out of it in grad school. I guess I was just ready to really see all the ways in which it applied. And I think it's an important mode of thinking because really nothing about economics is intuitive, I find.
Yeah, there's that joke slash just a common thing. And Professor Dana taught this in his first or second lecture in behavioral economics. And I revisited with him once I started taking my course right now, because there were similar problems asking you about opportunity cost. And I was like, I know a lot of my classmates probably got it wrong, but because Professor Dana went over it in undergrad, I was like, oh, this is the trick. This is the trick. So even economists get a lot of these things wrong.
Fair. I mean, nothing about, I mean, yeah, it's not supposed to be intuitive, I guess, but right. Yeah.
Yeah. So did you have like a paper or a specific experiment you did, whether at Carnegie Mellon or afterwards, that you're like, wow, this is mind blowing. I want to learn more.
I'm sorry, like that. Did I read something that really?
Oh, or like either you read something or you actually designed an experiment that made you realize, okay, I want to explore more into this area. I really want to study this more.
You know, it's hard to say, but I mean, just continuing on our train of thought, where I've really become interested lately and started focusing my work more is on what you might call folk economics. We call it lay economics or lay economic reasoning. And it's just the systematic ways in which our thinking, well, as lay people's thinking about economics, deviates from the scientific approach. Why that is so and why it matters. So I think a lot about these things. And, you know, again, a lot of that goes back to Carnegie Mellon, where, you know, I got a lot of grounding in this thinking, and it really changed because I was coming into those classes as basically as an economic layperson. It really changed the way I think. As far as like academic work, Brian Kaplan had a book called The Myth of the Rational Voter, in which he outlined sort of policy biases. They were basically economic that people had. And, you know, I know he's apparently a controversial figure, but I thought he hit the nail on the head there, right? That it was really, he had the psychology of it very strong. And so that's, you know, I said, man, we could take some of this, that a lot of that was observational work, like basically comparing how professional economists and lay people answered surveys, right? And how they thought differently about policy issues. And I said, well, you know, we can take some of that into the experimental realm too. We can do various manipulations and see what makes people more and less think more and less like economists, and like where their intuitions may be coming from. And so that's something that now has become a major focus for me, where, you know, lay economic reasoning.
When I took your behavioral economics course, did you talk about the myth of the rational voter?
Possibly.
Okay.
I think what we did on the first day, one of the first days, was to do a little experiment in the wisdom of the crowds, because we were looking at various ways why behavioral might matter. And basically, I guess what we did is to think about ways in which it wouldn't matter, like why some people say don't worry about behavioral. So we looked at how maybe markets can have efficient prices even if most people don't have good information. And we also looked at how a vote could be very accurate even if most people don't know the right answer. So I think I asked some sort of weird question about the Google logo, but there's more than 200 people in the room, and you know that like everybody votes, and there's of course there's some votes for all the wrong answers, but the most popular answer was the right answer. I said, well, if people who don't know what the answer is are just sort of randomly voting, then over time that will kind of equal out, and it will only take a few people who know the right answer to push that one to victory. But then we used another question where people don't randomly distribute their wrong answers, right? They have theories, but their theories are wrong. So we had a very strange question about what kind of drink button Lyndon Johnson had installed in the White House. And the crowd is not right. And the crowd was never right anytime that I taught it in a large room about this question, right? And so the point there was voting is really smart if, when people don't know the answer, they just recourse to random answers, right? But if you have if you're systematically attracted to something that's bad or something that's wrong, that's a problem. And the law of large numbers and votes don't fix that. So yeah, we did talk about this a little bit, as we were kind of giving a reason, a rationale why you should care about behavioral economics.
Yeah. And it's something that in your course we talked about, right? The framing of people. If you frame it, depending on how you frame it, people will think very differently.
Sure.
So you're about to go back to Penn, which is awesome. I'm sure. Shout out Christina Bikiri. I'm sure Professor Bikiri is very happy. Are you going to be teaching the same course?
Similar. I don't, it's undecided. I'll tell you in September.
Okay.
But yes, it's basically a behavioral science course.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the way I will approach it, and the sort of grounding I'll have is in behavioral econ. So it'll be a lot like what you got when you were an undergrad, and for better or for worse.
Are you going to be teaching mostly grad students this time?
Yes. So the Penn has now a master's in behavioral and decision sciences. So I'll be working within that master's program and teaching a core course within the master's.
Ooh, that in itself will be super fascinating. I definitely want to interview you in the future once, let's say, you teach a semester of this, because just knowing what I know about who goes to grad school and maybe who is taking your class undergrad is probably going to be different types of people. So how will that differ culturally, everything? I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, we'll see. The undergrad course was kind of a large lecture, but sometimes I got people to participate anyway, right? We asked questions of the class and sort of wait people out. And I thought it was okay that way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How do you think, this might be too broad, so I can focus this question a little bit more. How do you think the field of behavioral economics is evolving or will evolve these next 5 years?
That's a great question. I'm so unsure. I think one thing that's happening is there used to be a lot of in-person lab experimental work done in behavioral economics, and that's really changing, right? There are online experiments, but I feel even the nature of those is, I don't know, just a hunch or an intuition, those are changing. That's really hard to say. And obviously now I think everyone is turning their attention, rightly so, to how people interact with artificial intelligence. So this is like, I think the whole world is changing very, very quickly. And I guess, sort of the focus of behavioral economics will move along with that.
That's a good observation. And that was something that attracted me to the human computer interaction type of field, right? Because they even mentioned that, oh yeah, they're starting to fuse behavioral economics into the human computer interaction paradigm. So yeah, that's definitely something to look out for. And I'm sure your alma mater, Carnegie Mellon especially, is doing a lot of good work into that.
Probably.
Yeah. And maybe this is how I will focus this question more. How your approach to behavioral economics / your teaching / maybe the future experiments you do, how has that changed, or how will that change?
Well, obviously, teaching wise, you probably want to devise ways for people to work with language models, right? And that in and of itself is interesting, because I've certainly looked at them myself when I'm preparing lectures and things. And I don't know, they're hit and miss in terms of how well they apply behavioral economic theories and, what kind of output you get from them. So I guess as with any other topic, right, we have to think about how people will know how they'll get good output from them, and how they'll know how well they understand the concepts. In part is how well you understand the quality of the output you're getting.
Yeah.
How good you are at eliciting something you can use.
As sort of the large language models came out, I think as a professor, how much did you sort of embrace or restrict your students in using them? Like, did you encourage students to just use them?
I didn't at first. That might have been wrong. I think a lot of professors resisted, because in their minds it's like, well, I have this course already mapped out, and now people can cheat. They can have these things write their assignments for them or things like that. At the time I was mainly teaching, a couple years back when things really started, I was mainly teaching business ethics at that time.
Oh.
And a lot of the assignments were a little bit personal too. They might involve your application of the ideas in your life, you having an opinion, your work experiences. So I didn't love like, yes, you can get ideas about how to write something from a language model, but I didn't like the idea that you might not even engage with it at all and apply your own person. And I think at that time I was writing pretty good questions, such that when I ran them through language models, the answers were okay, but not great. But now I think going forward, we need to take another step, and like trying to get people not to use language models is to me, it's almost irresponsible in education now, because we're going to have to work with this technology. We will be working with this technology. So I think now the focus is shifting, especially to, I didn't at first, but now I think it's important to come up with ways to have people use the models but still learn something from that.
Yeah, and that probably is a whole field that will evolve. Like, it's like an education field, maybe. How do you learn optimally with the language models and stuff like that?
Management, you're going to manage agents now. You're not going to manage people, not as much. I think you have to know how to do that. Everything, sure.
Yeah. Are there any books you're working on right now?
I usually work on journal articles. Although I'm, like I was alluding to earlier, I think the lay economic topic is really fertile. And we wrote like Amit Bhattacharjee at Colorado and myself wrote like sort of a critical review, like what's out there, try to synthesize it and try to say, we were writing it to consumer behavior researchers, trying to say like why you should care about this, why it matters for understanding consumer behavior. And the paper went too long. And honestly, that was after our attempts to cut it down quite a bit. I think like that this is a huge topic, which it could definitely develop into like a full book length. And I'm happy to tell you some things about lay economics.
I think let's keep exploring this. Two, if you do turn it into the book, I will read whatever chapters you want.
Sure.
Shout out Professor Carla Hoff at Columbia. She's writing kind of like an updated paradigm type of book about just the econ profession, culture, etc. And I've been helping her read and like edit stuff. So like I'll extend that offer to you too. I want to encourage you to get this book out.
That's very interesting. I'd love to see that when it comes out.
Yeah, exactly. So let's explore a little bit more about sort of like lay economics, people's misunderstandings. Obviously I probably could think of some, but tell me about like if you had to give like an elevator pitch, like give someone the most interesting thing, what would it be?
Oh, you just gave me the hardest question about this.
I know I did. For some reason I've been asking very hard questions today. I'm just really excited to talk to you, Professor Dana.
Wow. So I don't have my elevator pitch yet. I mean, I think that lay versions of economics as compared with scientific ones are they're intuitive, they're moralized, and they're zero sum. And sort of, like what do I mean by those things? I guess like we can unpack it a little by going to the root of it, right? So we said, for whatever reasons, economics is super unintuitive. And I'd like to tell you about two reasons why economics is very unintuitive, and why people's experiences lead them to favor certain policies that economists would say, from a scientific point of view, like those are bad policies, right? One of them is just like our daily experience, right? Daniel Kahneman, in the Thinking Fast and Slow, one sort of grand mechanism he sort of proposed for where a lot of our judgmental biases come from, and about a lot of our decision foibles. He said, people that we act as if what we see is all there is. What you see is all there is, with Ciati, I think he said. All right. And if you did a careful examination of what it is that people see, then you would be able to kind of understand better lay theories about the world. Specific to economics, all the way back in the 19th century, Frederick Bastiat, I think he was the original behavioral economist in a sense, but he talked about the seen and the unseen in economics, and he said that bad economists focus on the seen. And he gave us this very famous parable about the broken window. You're familiar with this?
Some people call it the broken glass. Yeah, the broken window.
Broken glass. Yeah.
Fallacy.
So
yeah.
if the audience isn't, there's a shopkeeper. His son breaks the window to the shop, and now the shopkeeper has to spend 6 francs to fix the window, to a glazier to put in a new window. And Bastiat said, there are some people that, while they think, oh, that's too bad for the shopkeeper, who would think that this is actually good for the local economy, because now the glazier has 6 francs, and the glazier might spend the 6 francs on something, and then that person, and that this spurs economic activity. And Bastiat says, well, that's true if you look at the seen, but what about the unseen, right? If the window hadn't been broken, the shopkeeper would have spent the even if it's savings, would use the 6 francs towards something else, like could buy a new pair of shoes or something like that, right? And when you consider that the 6 francs would go elsewhere, if not to the glazier, you start to realize that there's no uptick in economic activity in industry. But what you do also see is that the shopkeeper is worse off. Now the shopkeeper has the enjoyment of a new window. Had the window not been broken, the shopkeeper could have had the enjoyment of a window and new shoes, right? And so I just think that this is beautiful, because if you look at our daily experiences, right, they also tend to be really misleading about how markets work. Yeah. We use an example in the paper of just going to Home Depot and buying a handsaw, like a simple tool, right? And when I do that, taken in isolation, this transaction seems like it doesn't involve a whole lot of other people, right? It's like a matter between me and Home Depot. Home Depot appears to set the price. They put a price tag on the saw, and I don't go to the register and say, well, how about 10 instead of 15? And most of the time, unless the price is wildly different than I was expecting, I'm going to buy the saw, right? I'm not that price sensitive for most things I buy. I might be a little bit surprised at how cheap or how expensive it was. It might have not have been exactly what I was expecting, right? And so the sum total of interactions like that would lead me to believe some things. For one, it would lead me to believe that the transaction is zero sum, which, and by zero sum, I don't mean that somebody wins and somebody loses. I just mean that if Home Depot was to change their price, supposing they were lowered the price of the saw The only consequence in that one transaction is that I would get more surplus and they would get less. It would be more profitable for me, right? And taken in isolation, any one-off transaction is zero sum, right? If Home Depot lowers the price, good for me at their expense, right? And they're bigger than me, so why wouldn't I want that? And it also leads me to believe maybe that they have more market power than they do, because they seem to be able to set prices. And I seem to be pretty insensitive to that price setting, right? But what we see here in this transaction is like a tip of an iceberg, right? And there's a whole bunch of unseen stuff. For one thing, even though I am not the marginal consumer, we know that retail, even in home improvement or whatever, is a competitive industry. And if Home Depot consistently charged too little, like compared to competitors, or too much, they would find themselves out of business, either losing money or not selling, not being able to sell the saw, right? You also see that there's a lot of powerful constraints on the price of the saw that are determined by the behavior of millions of other people in intersecting markets, right? The company that supplies the saw, they have a bunch of different opportunity costs. And opportunity cost is something you brought up earlier. What would they do if they weren't making this product and selling it to this retailer at this price? Opportunity costs are literally invisible. They're what you would have done if you weren't doing this, right? And so are they going to sell to a big retailer or direct to consumer online or through sales agents? Will they make products for weekend warriors or for professionals? What price and quality levels they set? These are all decisions that are determined in part by the marketplace and by what people want and what they're willing to expend. The cost of the materials that goes into it, the wood, the metal, is determined by markets, right? And how badly other people need that wood and metal, what other uses they have for it. If they're very important uses, the cost of those inputs will go up, which kind of forces the cost of the saw to go up. The labor that goes into it, and even the labor on the retail side, like the people selling it, right? How much you have to pay them depends on what their opportunities are in the marketplace, what are general macroeconomic conditions like, et cetera, et cetera. So you start to dig into this, and you very quickly see that there are millions of other people who are impacting this one trade, that are powerfully constraining what the prices could be, and that prices do a lot more than merely divide a surplus between me and Home Depot. They actually direct goods and labor and everything to where it's most needed. The price is a signal, right? And so it's funny that literally everything that goes into bringing this particular product to this particular place at this time, at this price, those factors are mostly invisible to us. They're mostly the things we never see when we go to purchase one thing, right? But those are also the things that are not zero sum, right? The competitive factors, the choice, the opportunity costs people face, like the prices that convey how valuable the labor, the materials are. These are all things that are positive sum. These are all things about prices if you believe in a market system, right? These are the forces that make prices direct behavior in good ways and enlarge the pie in a market system, right? But they're all literally invisible to us. So of course we can learn about them, we can intellectualize them, you can take a class at Johns Hopkins or something like this, but your day-to-day experiences will almost necessarily be at odds with this understanding because you don't see the marketplace, you see a one-off transaction every single time, right?
And that is,
I talk so long, I'm taking a pause so you can intervene.
This is very, very interesting / it's something that I've thought about, because a standard economics master's or a standard economics PhD, usually they'll focus on something within micro or focus on something within macro, or if they do international economics, which I will do at least 2 classes of at Hopkins, they'll focus something in international trade or something like that. But even then, you get so specific and siloed within your specialty of economics, you'll sometimes lose track of the big picture / all the unseen that you talked about. Like I've talked to economists who are just like, yeah, my focus was in micro. I can't really fathom / I don't think macro is too well defined / applicable at the higher level. So like even economists forget about a lot of the unseen that's outside of their specific field.
Yeah, yeah, fair. There's a second reason, I think, now that economics is very unintuitive, right? And if you study developmental psychology, you'll certainly become aware of something that we could call, that has been called by developmental psychologists, core knowledge. Stuff that human beings almost know innately or are like very prepared to learn very easily. So you take a baby, and I don't know if people have probably seen these experiments, but you have like a glass partition, like a glass floor, and it looks like it drops, a visual cliff, but it actually doesn't. Babies will be scared of that at a very young age. They won't crawl across it, right? Way too early for them to have learned that from experience, right? And at very young ages, children are able to make inferences about the motion of objects. Like a ball rolls behind something and another thing gets knocked out, and they understand, it seems, that the ball hit it out. So they learn these things way before experience could have taught you. If you had been raised in isolation and never told what a snake was and never had seen one, and you as an adult saw a brightly colored snake, you wouldn't think, oh, that's cute, let me pet it. You'd be scared, right? Even I guess children at very young ages, when they're not good at doing a lot of formal reasoning, are pretty good at guessing what other people's intentions are, like what's going on in their head, which is quintessentially unseen, stuff that you never see, right? So, apparently then there's some stuff that more than others that we're prepared to know and prepared to learn. I don't like telling just so evolutionary stories. I know some people don't like, but obviously these were adaptive things, right? Like learning to guess what someone else's intentions are, learning what's dangerous in the environment, learning, how the physical environment works around you. I'm not saying that people's lay psychology and biology and physics are perfect, but our lay theories are pretty functional. We don't wander in front of traffic or something, or bump into walls or something like this, right? Now, the thing that's different, so you'd say, could you have like if markets are really have really contributed to human welfare, couldn't we have like a core knowledge of markets? But the thing to understand there is that the last 10,000 years or so, maybe 12, are so different than the entire rest of human history in this regard, right, and on an evolutionary timeline, 10,000 years is nothing, right? Like 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, people lived in small nomadic groups with mostly kinship relations. Like they had very few personal possessions because of that. If they had them, they were usually cheap to replace or to make. We spent most of our time hunting and gathering. There was like very little specialization of labor, maybe by age or gender, but mostly people did the same things. We all try to find food. Very little trade with outside groups. You didn't see wealth creation, right? Like you would born and die, and you see some shocks, like some bad things happen and we go hungry, but you don't see like the standard of living ever improve, right? Over about a 250,000 year period, economic historians, by measuring the number of possessions people had and such in various methods, estimate that wealth roughly doubled in 250,000 years, right? Whereas in the last, 300, right, it's increased, 30-fold possibly. Right? So it's just a totally different world we're living in. And even innovations, like small improvements in stoneworking techniques used to take thousands of years to emerge, right? As opposed to like in my lifetime, I was born and nobody was using the internet. And now we're talking about language models and things. So we just don't have there was no adaptive pressure to understand markets, to understand exchange, other than to know maybe who you could trust. Like if I share food with you today because I got lucky, I should be good at tracking whether you reciprocate next week. So I'm always on guard to see who's pulling their weight, whether people free ride, but I don't have any basis for understanding modern markets and trade, and specifically the idea that's really made us rich, that we all specialize in our labor and then trade for what we need through some medium exchange like money. This doesn't describe almost all of human history. So we didn't develop cognitively in a world that's anything like modern markets. So of course, there's no reason that they would just be intuitive to us, that they would just be baked in and be ready to understand them.
That is such a really cool way to sort of go from evolutionary history to kind of, you're pulling in anthropology, you're pulling in, that I never thought about it like that. And I'm going to make a point that I think supports you. And I'm going to pull from positive psychology a little bit, or maybe it's not positive psychology, just in general, pulling from what I see, which is obviously most people now are a little bit more specialized than, let's say, the person 10,000 years ago. And most people now objectively have more wealth than someone 10,000 years ago. But from a happiness perspective, are we, that was more happy than before, right? And I think this is pure hypothesis, so take this with a grain of salt. Because our brains weren't built to be too specialized, if you specialize, the word I always use is silo. If you silo yourself too much, maybe that's a reason why it contributes to unhappiness. Again, guys, hypotheses. I can't be making a theory right now, but there's a hypothesis.
That's a very interesting one, right? Obviously, material wealth has grown beyond what anyone could ever have imagined, right? It's hard to say whether that brings happiness, because by the same argument, right, we developed in a world that was meant for maybe small group interaction and belonging, right? And in some countries, at least, like in the US, there's a lot of forces that work against that. So you could say maybe we're not as happy as we could be with all of this wealth because we're still kind of learning or adapting to life in a big impersonal marketplace. And I think that gets more interesting as we look forward. I mean, I think there's real possibilities in the not too distant future of having universal high income. Basically that we'll see a super acceleration in productivity because of these new technologies, humanoid robots, artificial intelligence, etc. But will we also have some sort of unrest, right? What would your life be if, because there's so much abundance that you don't need much for material things, yet your work is pretty useless, if we're to be honest, right? Because it can be done. It can be done faster by robots or by an artificial intelligence, something like this. So, right, how will people adapt to that world? How will they find a sort of sense of purpose and belonging? I could see both a beautiful, I could see this beautiful sort of world of abundance, but also yet maybe people also not being happy with it at first, at least.
Yeah. And again, this is just my personal anecdotal example. So I'll always take this with a grain of salt, how much is generalizable. But for me, what seemed to work is because with all their new technologies, all our new resources, I think on average, if you put the mind to it, you can learn something quicker than, let's say, 500 years ago, or even 20 years ago. So what it's made an average human able to do, if he or she puts their mind to it, is you can become a specialist quicker. So if you become a specialist quicker, you can become a specialist in many fields. So it's almost like an argument for not necessarily what did they call it, mile wide inch deep type of behavior, but you're going to be able to be mile deep in multiple areas. So it's almost like doing what our ancestors did of having so much more brain power devoted to so many things, but you can do that and update it with the modern paradigm and with modern learning tools. And I think my hypothesis, that's how you stay happy. That's how you stay fulfilled in this ever-changing world. Keep learning to the point where you can become a specialist in like 20 different areas, because we have that capability now, both our brain power and the technology to match it.
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
Or I'm just like using maybe ex post facto, I think that's the right word, way of justifying going to grad school / my learning.
Yeah. Well, learning makes you happy, right? You're a person, maybe other people.
Yeah, exactly. But I love this because it seems like talking to you now versus, and maybe it's just because I didn't talk to you enough when I was an undergrad, you're thinking almost partly philosophically now. Like there's a philosophical element that is factoring at least into your thinking in behavioral economics.
If that's how you want to go, right? But yes, I mean, I think we have to dig deeper into the origins of where lay economic thought comes from if we're going to like be able to understand, predict it, work with it, change it, etc. So those are some thoughts on sort of why people think the way they do about economics. And then, yeah, I guess there's really a lot of different applications to policy, which I think are interesting. But I try to pull some from maybe either side of the political aisle, because I know that yeah. One thing that seems very popular now in New York City is the idea that we could have a control on the price of rent, or that even, especially I think is interesting, is the idea of a state-run grocery store, right? And it's pretty easy to see how someone could find that idea attractive, because again, in your experiences, it certainly seems like the seller must have a great deal of market power, and the seller can set their prices. So, and this does bear out in surveys, right? People think that there are more monopolies than there are, and people think that the profit margins that firms run at are much larger than they do. So if you think that grocery stores have a larger margin than they actually do, you might think that, well, like we could lower prices if the store simply didn't work for profit. Now, in reality, margins at a grocery store are probably very tight, 3%, something like this. And being able to manage efficiently is absolutely key to survival there, which, right, like a specialist in the industry was probably much more prepared to do than a government, which isn't in the business of running grocery stores, or really, any business. But you could see why it could be an attractive proposition.
Yeah, applying basic economics, for example, rent control, right? Which is something that when I lived in Santa Monica by the beach, we had. And obviously, an economist, again, talking about applying the unseen, but also just basic economic theory, would say, well, the issue with rent control is the people that get it below market value can then sort of resell it, right? They can rent it out to other people. So I know explicitly in Santa Monica, for example, if you got into one of those rent control apartments, you were forbidden from doing Airbnb, or forbidden from being like a subcontractor type of getting a tenant for you, right? So like that would be their way, because they even know from an economics perspective / a person thinking probably rationally will eventually figure this out, even if they don't take economics. It's like, oh yeah, I could sort of like gain because this is what the market price, right? So this is an example of like, it's counter to what the markets naturally would do.
Yeah, but it's very, very hard to stop people from taking on roommates or subletting to a friend. It may be against the rules, but I knew of some fairly wealthy people who were doing just that in New York City. So it happens.
Yeah, exactly. And then that goes into like another avenue. It's like, oh, well, maybe the law is just there to sort of like check boxes, but how much is it enforceable, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah. this is another topic, and I don't know if you think about this too, but I think a society needs a certain amount of base trust. So this is pulling maybe anthropology or pulling sociology a little bit for
Mhm.
whether like pure capitalism or whatever, for a lot of these things to happen. Like trust is something that I think is a base that a lot of economics doesn't think about. Like if I don't trust you, I'm not going to believe the prices are correct. I'm not going to believe you're not gouging me, right? So like there's got to be a base level of trust for a lot of these benefits of capitalism to happen. I don't know if that's something you've thought about or you agree with.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting in some lines of research we've done. Um, well, I have a paper on what we call efficiency neglect. I don't want to get too deeply into the ideas there because it could take a while, but here's a base like starting thing. We see that people are really miscalibrated about economic trends. So, we have data going back quite a long time on two things. One is the nominal price of goods. So the Board of Labor Statistics, for instance, tracks like how much does a pound of bananas cost in the average U.S. city or so, average across U.S. cities or something like this, right? And they have this for a bunch of different things, and so, a lot of food items, but also gasoline, electricity in kilowatt hours, et cetera, et cetera. You also have the just the nominal average hourly wage of non-supervisory and production workers, right? So these are not CEOs or pro athletes. It's just like people working in various sectors like manufacturing, construction and mining, retail. And so you look across these areas and you see like what's the average wage that people make. So, we borrowed this technique from some other economists where you describe the price of things in time it takes to buy them. So let's divide the nominal price of something in any given time by the average hourly wage and say, how long do you have to work to buy this?
Mm.
And I think this is a really good and really intuitive kind of measure of real price, right? What's the real cost of things? But also, you don't remember a time in your life where the real price of something was, so it's not something that you can recall, it's something you have to reason about. And people think the real prices of a whole bunch of goods are going up over time and have been going up over time for decades. And in almost every case, they've gone down.
Oh.
Yeah. So, which is absolutely predictable, right? As we get higher levels of productivity, economic efficiency, consumption type goods go down. Right? Not human labor. It will cost you more today to hire someone to look after your children or something like this, because if people are richer, then their labor costs more. But bananas, chicken, electricity, gasoline, all cheaper, much cheaper. People think more expensive. But one of the things we speculated about in that paper, and I see a lot online, is that people, based on these faulty, this miscalibration about economic trends, have a feeling that someone has ruined the country for them. So a lot of young people say boomers grew up like this, right? They had this. You could have like a blue collar job and raise a family of four in a big suburban home on one salary. And now look at our world, right? Nobody can afford anything. They ruined it. They fucked the deck, right? The boomers ruined everything for us. And I do think that there's a lot of, so that there is like one source of a loss of trust in the system is like a sort of a miscalibration, misunderstanding about where economic trends are going, right? If you think that things are getting worse economically, at least for some people, then you got to think, well, how did that happen, right? Technology tends to get better. Progress. If things are getting worse economically, somebody's done something wrong. Someone's messed up the system, right? And I don't like the system anymore. And I think that's like a non-trivial portion of mistrust in the system, right? People think that the system used to work for some people and now it doesn't, and it's gotten worse. And so who's to blame for that?
Yeah. One, I think in especially in microeconomics, you learn the term economies of scale, right? So like, yeah, things do get more efficient. Things, unless you overproduce it too much, usually it gets cheaper, on average. Another thing I think about along your lines is, besides the "oh, boomers" thing, another thing you hear people say is, "Oh yeah, when they decided just get every woman to work, or get a big group of women to work, and now women are working, so then it forced everyone's salary down," right? You hear talk like this, and it's like, have people really like studied this from an economics perspective? Or is this just kind of like using whatever conjecture to sort of throw blame on people? So like, that's another example I thought about immediately.
Yeah, and when you say is this studied economically, I think sometimes even professionals and economists have maybe not done a lot to be enlightening. Like the terms that people use are confusing, right?
Yeah.
So you talk about things like inflation versus cost of living, like what's the difference, et cetera. There's a lot of different ways we can talk about how salaries have changed, prices are changed, et cetera, et cetera. But what I was suggesting before with the time value of things is something that I think is irrefutable, and that is consumption standards have risen. People can and do consume more stuff now than they did then, right? That I think is irrefutable. A lot of other stuff can be very confusing. Real wages have stagnated if you look at this way, that way, the other way. Inflation has done this, salaries have done that, prices have done that, right? But at a very basic level, consumption standards are constantly on the rise. They're improving, improving, improving. That is irrefutably true.
I love talking to interdisciplinary people, which I consider you. It helps you reframe a field, and it helps you understand a field from a different angle. So yeah, that's why whatever I do, economics wise, I'll just have people like you or people like Professor Hoff, who I would consider more behavioral economists. I just constantly talk to you guys, just different perspective, but it's a perspective that I think everyone needs. I'm very, very, very kind of worried about people being too specialized, right? But then if we apply capitalism, it's like, no, specialization is basically where it's at. But I'm also partly worried when people are too specialized. And I guess this is going beyond economics. This may be like political science, or like, I don't know, thinking about this type of stuff. If people are too specialized, I don't think we can have a true democracy, because you need to be able to understand where someone else who's completely different field, completely different upbringing, how they're talking. You need to be able to process what they're saying and find common ground. And if people are too specialized, we can't do that, or it's harder to do that. So that's sort of like where my mind is right now. So like, I like people who do interdisciplinary stuff, because by their trade, by their practice, they have to synthesize from different fields.
Yeah. And I guess this is the march. You could say that this is a kind of a market within science, right? The march of progress forward definitely means that there aren't good incentives to be interdisciplinary, right? The incentives are to be highly specialized in very small segments. That's where science goes. That's where the frontier work is, et cetera. I'm sure that overall that's a good thing, although, right, it is harder to convey a bigger picture look at things, or to have a bigger picture look at things when we're all pressured to be experts in very specific areas, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Just like our labor becomes ever more specialized, and some people say, well, that's alienating, right? Like that's the Marxist famous critique, right? Because you're a cog in a wheel, you're doing one specific piece, and maybe you don't really realize or feel your impact. Yeah.
I had a period of time before the current summer stuff started with grad school where I could sort of work a little. So I went and I decided I want to pick up a new skill, and I worked at a coffee shop. And I was of that mind. I want to be that coffee shop guy in the wheel, right? That specific cog. But what ended up happening was the coffee shop I worked at, first of all, it had its problems, but I'm very thankful with the skills I gained. It wasn't just a coffee shop. It was a sandwich shop plus a juice shop plus
Mhm.
some other things but it made most of its money selling juices. So what ended up happening was I didn't learn as much coffee skills as I wanted, but I learned to
Huh.
make juices and I learned to make sandwiches. In fact, most of the training was how to make sandwiches. So it was one of those things where it's like I wanted to be a more specialized cog, but they actually forced me to be less of a specialized cog. And take it or leave it, obviously my biggest um, want of a skill was to be that like super powerful barista, which I didn't get as much training in, but I got a bunch of other skill training. So like I thought about that. I'm like, so in a way that's sort of like counter to what Mark said. It's like, I don't know, it's just things to think about that I re-examining certain paradigms. Yeah, I just wanted to express that because I don't think I've ever really talked about this like 4-month phase where I just randomly get a new skill and randomly work a job.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, so you'll be teaching one class in the fall.
Yeah, it's just that, I mean, a couple sections, but that it'd be basically teaching behavioral economics. Yes.
Oh, I see. And what about like the sort of the corporate ethics stuff you taught back? Are you still going to potentially teach that in the future, or is that sort of a done thing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how it might be rebranded, but I still think it's super interesting and connects a lot to some of the things we've been talking about, right? I'm talking to people that are going into management, that are doing highly abstract kind of work that kind of enables productivity, right? Management. Even you say you're learning to be a barista, whatever it is that you're doing, you're handing someone a drink, you're handing someone a sandwich, and the way you interact with them, and you can tangibly see how you might be making them happier, right? In a very specialized market, a lot of that is lost, and there was uh gee whiz, I'm blanking. I'm having a panic here. uh, Thinking about the philosopher who talked about the uh, had like the 1,000 torturers experiment. Let's see if I check through. I bet I can find. I have. Yeah. Derek Parfit. Okay. So Derek Parfit had this really interesting paper on philosophical treatise on mistakes in moral algebra. I think he called it, or whatever, moral mathematics, something. And he envisioned scenarios like the following: like, say there's 1,000 torturers, right? And each one has a person in it. Now, this is very graphic, but they're in like a torture device, and you can turn the knob all the way up and electrocute them and cause them pain. Right? Now, Parfit was addressing the idea that if you didn't feel the impact of something, if nobody felt the impact of something, it couldn't be doing harm. So he said, imagine each of those torturers turn the knob only 1/1000th, right? And perhaps the person can't even tell the difference. And then they step to the right and they go to the next machine and go 1/1000, 1/1000, right? At the end of the day, 1,000 people are still tortured by 1,000 people, right? But none of the actions of the individual were ever noticed. And Parfit used this to make the argument that this is just wrong. This is a moral mistake, right? I think like a similar thing could be applied to like 1,000 pleasurers, right? Like imagine that what you do is basically turning up the dial 1/1000th or even 1/1,000,000th or whatever on a bunch of different people's pleasure. So in aggregate, you're doing a lot to provide welfare to the world, to people, to make the world a better place. But you probably never feel that way, right? Like you can literally say, if I stopped doing my job, no one would notice. By construction of our problem, absolutely true. Because all you're doing to every different person is turning the dial 1/1,000,000th, right? This does not mean that, in fact, you're doing nothing, right? And I kind of pose this as the modern management challenge, right? How do you reconnect people with the end product of what you're doing? How do you help people to realize, right, the benefit, like the goodness that the basic goodness that they're providing for the world through their work, when in any day-to-day, like if you're in one of these symbolic type professions, these abstract where I'm managing and helping enhance productivity, you never see this. You never hand someone the drink and see their smile or something, right? And how is it that you feel like you're doing something for someone? Yeah. And then, as we said earlier, right, as the world automates, this problem should probably in many ways get worse. And how do we learn to deal with that? Yeah.
Wow. It's so interesting. So you're thinking about it from, let's say, the management level, even within like the level where they hand the drink to someone, right? I think there should be modeling slash like analysis of this, because the knowing the differences between Europe and America, and the coffee shop I worked for started out in Europe. So you can see a big discrepancy between the number of employees in Europe on average for the same amount of busyness versus in America. So the reason I'm saying that is because in America, usually, so it's so optimized for efficiency, the person, it does feel like you're turning one millionth of a dial when it comes to customer engagement, even if you're the person making the coffee, the person making the sandwich, the person on the register. So after a while, you feel like you're not making a difference from the customer perspective, even though in training they keep saying, customer, man, you have to really focus on like, making the customer smile. But the reality is you feel like, I'm so overworked, I have to make 20 sandwiches in 10 minutes. How am I going to even say hi to the customer? But applying your
Yeah.
paradigm, what you don't realize is you're actually still turning that one millionth of a pleasure. So it's hard for you to quantify that when, if you're looking at, okay, like every customer, man, I didn't get to like up their pleasure by 10 tiles or whatever, right? But from a collective thing over the months, over every customer, and then all your coworkers together, even if you're overworked, you feel like you're not making a difference, you are making a difference. It's like, how do you even communicate that part of it? I don't know the answer. I'm just posing something because like you're giving me something so important to think about. I didn't even think about, because I'll be honest, all of us working there felt like because we're so busy, we didn't have more coworkers, we weren't making a difference enough to the customer. But I don't think the customer feels that way. I think the customer really enjoyed whatever they could get.
Yeah, like another paradox of happiness and high levels of consumption is when things work right, you don't even realize that they're working right? Like you only notice when things go wrong, and it makes you unhappy. Yeah. I think in your class, I dropped this thing because it was pretty fresh. I think back around 2010, Consumer Reports dropped a report about used cars. So they tracked 5-year-old cars from 2005 to 2010. And they found that during that time period, the rate of major repairs that they required dropped by 1/3. To me, over just 5 years, that's a huge drop. Like cars are becoming noticeably much more reliable over a 5-year time period. And who the hell even knew that? Like, did anyone, you ever hear people walking around, wow, cars are just so much more reliable now. I feel so good, right? Now, if your car breaks down or needs a major repair when you're trying to go to work or when your budget is thin and you have to shell out the money, now you know how awful it is, right? But you just don't think about it when your car just works right. Yeah. I probably wouldn't like jump over the counter and hug you because my sandwich or my coffee was right. But it's just like when those little when I get the little things I want or like, and when those transactions go smoothly, I'm just functioning better. I'm more productive. My day is going better. I might even know it, right? I only know it when something sucks or when something goes wrong. Right. So it's very funny. Like there's a lot of happiness and things just being consistent and getting the things you want when you want them, with things working right. that maybe you don't even realize because it's like an absence of pain. Right? You
Yeah.
didn't even know it was happening.
Yeah. The other topic, and there's probably some term in behavioral economics for this, but uh, I call it, layperson calls it ignorance is bliss, right? So before I learned how to make coffee correctly, I never judged the quality of coffee I got at other places.
Oh,
But
right.
now that I know how coffee's supposed to be made, I basically can't really enjoy any of the coffee unless like I really need it because I didn't get enough sleep. But like if I'm not sleep deprived, I really can't enjoy the coffee I get anywhere else because now I realize like the average barista, even at specialty coffee shops, can't make coffee correctly. Espresso based shots. I'm not talking about drip coffee, espresso based drinks. And I remember one time in Santa Monica, this French lady came to my favorite local coffee shop and she like walked there. She's like, this was the worst cappuccino or latte I ever tasted. And we're all laughing, but now I understand her because nobody, zero person since I learned how to make a cappuccino, zero person I've ever stumbled on since knows how to make a cappuccino. So I can't taste a cappuccino the same way anymore. So
Yeah,
what is that called in economics?
I don't know. I did a class on espresso, believe it or not, when for my wife's birthday one year. We went to Brooklyn. We took a class, and it was both in how to prepare it properly and then how to do latte art. So you learned the espresso part, and then you learned the milk parts and the art, like doing the designs in it or whatever, which I now understand like is a measure of quality, a marker of quality, because if you do things wrong, the art won't look right. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, there's like now I understand why, and I'm not an espresso person, I guess, but I understand why it's a very exacting thing, right? To do it properly, you have to be very consistent and very precise in all your procedures. Yeah, and you could say that in general, right? We have this sort of adjustment we make. That as rather than walking around saying, wow, I have all these things that my ancestors didn't have, look at all this consumption I have, right? Like it just becomes very normal to you and you just raise your expectations. This is a long-standing idea in the psychology of happiness and positive psychology, right? Like why maybe consumption won't make us happy is because we adapt to it and then we just want better and better stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
once we get a taste of good things, now I want even better stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I feel like if we wanted to, we could talk for hours. And I want to encourage everyone who has Professor Dana's classes in the future, like if he has office hours, go visit him. Like I obviously enjoyed your lecture and we had a few conversations undergrad, but in undergrad, I just wasn't proactive enough going to office hours. And if I could pass that along both to grad students and to undergrad, because the average grad student's age is going down too, like I want everyone to take advantage of office hours. That's my tip for anyone going into college, going into undergrad, restarting their school. Take advantage of office hours because think about this conversation that Professor Dana and I had. You could have this too, maybe in 20 minutes because usually office hours aren't as long as an interview, but just like talk to your professors, like learn from them. You can learn from them privately, not just in a lecture capacity.
Nice. Well, thanks for the shout out. Good talking as always.
And you obviously have a website. Will you have, let's say, some other social media in the future that people can follow you, maybe a YouTube channel or something like that? Or
Well, we'll see. Yeah, I think I may start. I haven't been a social media person in the past, but if we're going to start building the conversation and maybe making the conversation more public about lay economics, I think it's probably time to start posting things somewhere. So
yeah. And I'm sure when the time comes, we can maybe even crowdsource the name for the brand. Like, what should it be called? Lay economics
yeah,
for science, or there's probably some really interesting names we could give the channel, or a Blue Sky, or Beehive, whatever social media you decide to get into.
yeah. I'll be turning to you for a little guidance. Thank you.
Definitely. So, definitely when you start at Penn again, and I sort of get my footing at Hopkins and am able to figure out how much free time I have, I'll come visit Philly, and then maybe we can even sit down. I'll bring my camera. We could have a talk in person.
Fantastic. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, exactly. So for everyone watching, leave your comments, leave your questions, and Professor Dana will be back. This was Jerry Inspired.